Everyone. Unblocked is a bi-monthly event series where guests are asked questions in an AMA-style format, focusing on questions relevant to early-stage startups and blockchain technology. Unblocked is sponsored by DLab, a startup accelerator and venture studio that sits within the SOSV family. You can find out more at www.dlab.vc. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Great. Well, welcome everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce former DLab fellow Robert Kornacki, who's head of research at Emurgo and currently a foundation council member at Ergo, which is a proof of work smart contract platform whose primary focus is to provide an efficient and secure way to implement financial contracts. Rob, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you again after a while. I mean, yeah, it's been a year since I've been a DLab fellow, and glad to be here.
Much has changed. And so why don't we just get right into it and you talk about a little bit what drew you to Ergo? Because, it'd just be interesting to hear your viewpoint.
Right. So what was interesting to me about Ergo is that if anyone watching has looked at the smart contract and DeFi space over the past 2, 3, 4 years, there's been much more of a trend to get to the quote unquote higher level stuff. And so you could say like DeFi platform on top of DeFi platform on top of DeFi platform. But everyone's kind of sweeping under the rug the key essentials of blockchains that we're not really looking at and realizing that there's a lot of problems. And sure, lots of people are making millions and millions of dollars, but we're looking at Ethereum right now and it's not really sustainable, right? Like the size of Ethereum is I think 400 or 500 gigabytes, and it takes 4 months if you try to bootstrap from scratch to run a full node. And that's not really decentralized, right? Because you don't have the ability for anyone to just come onto the network, run a node, be able to join all this. Instead, you have this centralizing effect. And so with Ergo, what interested me is that a lot of the initial benefits, insights, and goals of Bitcoin are kind of reimagined or made possible and made real based off of newer tech, newer research that's come out in the past 5 years. And so that's why with Ergo, for people that don't know, it's a proof of work blockchain, like Paul said, and it is in the eUTXO model, so the extended UTXO model. That means we have full-fledged smart contracts on top of UTXO. And so when Ethereum created smart contracts, UTXOs are kind of more complicated for most people. And so Vitalik said, hey, let's throw the UTXO model away, which is what Satoshi Nakamoto came up with. And we're going to go back to account-based. It's more like a bank account, and then shove in smart contracts. And that has some pluses, but also a lot of minuses. And we're starting to really see that these days with Ethereum and how it's not really able to scale too much in the smart contract level, and even concepts of like scaling with sharding for smart contracts hasn't really been figured out because we have one smart contract lives on a single shard. And so then that's not really scaling your dApps, that's just shoving them in a small silo. And so before I talk on a tangent for an hour, suffice to say, Ergo tries to look at all these problems, stick with the fundamentals of Bitcoin that worked well, including proof of work. And the fact that we have proof of work provides us with some new tech like Newpopus, which maybe we can talk about later, and tries to optimize what Bitcoin did really well, but try to do them even better with new technology.
I see. And so does Ergo in the current state of Ergo, does it offer those features that I guess you had mentioned where, the block sizes, and because there's a lot of blockchains out there today, that purport to offer that similar features, it's better for financial contracts, things like that, but they're still either in development or still to be battle tested. So I guess my question would be, where is Ergo today in that regard? And how does it differ from, another blockchain out there, like a third generation blockchain, so to speak?
Right. So that's, we can answer that in a multi-pronged approach. So like I was saying with Newpopus and Ethereum, so one issue that no one's really targeting in the blockchain space, or very, very, very few projects, and Ergo is in the forefront of this, is not scalability of transactions, but scalability of the blockchain storage itself, so that it can actually stay decentralized. And so, like I was saying, it's 400 gigabytes in 4 months, and it's infinitely growing. So that maybe with how big DeFi is getting and all these price increases, in a year or two, we're gonna have a terabyte of Ethereum, and then in a few years, 5, 10 terabytes. This isn't really realistic. And so with Ergo, we have Newpopus that are going to be fully supported current.
Sorry to stop you. So for the audience, what's a Newpopus?
Yeah. So a Newpopus is a non-interactive proof of work. Big mouthful, but this is research that I educated a few years ago, and what it effectively does is it allows you to have a small proof. So rather than you have 400 gigabytes of blockchain, you can do some crazy mathematics and use certain features of proof of work, which is why this isn't possible in proof of stake. And it's only proof of work specific. And it allows you to summarize that entire 400 gigabytes in, say, some amount of kilobytes or a megabyte. And so that allows you to actually have full node security on light wallets, or be able to even do something like send some money to someone who's offline, not on the internet. They have no internet connection, but you send them this 1 megabyte proof, and they know 100% you sent the money, right? Because you can prove, because you showed them that you have this proof that you did this on the blockchain. And so it's kind of cool that we have this ability to try and set more limitations to what we come to expect about the blockchain, so that it's not just Infura that we have to talk with to try and deal with Ethereum, which is kind of effectively the state of Ethereum at the moment. But we can actually have lots of people running full nodes or Newpopus nodes, so that they're actually keeping up with the blockchain. And so then you have decentralization, and if Infura goes out, you still have a blockchain.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that. And also one other problem, for example, with storage, is that most blockchains, when you do anything in a smart contract, you pay a transaction fee once, and that data can be stuck there forever, right? And so this isn't very scalable either, because you have an infinitely growing state space, or your current state. What are all the smart contracts? What are all the data? And this is why, like messaging schemes people have tried to do on blockchain don't really make sense, because you pay once and everyone's expected for the rest of eternity to hold your messages for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this in Ergo, we have storage rent. And so when you pay a transaction fee, you pay for your UTXO to exist for 4 years. And so this is a solution that you actually pay the miners to hold your data. And so you have an actual economy for this state of the blockchain. And so this is something that actually provides you with an economic model that's sustainable. And then old UTXOs, if they're lost coins, or someone created a smart contract that was broken and the funds are stuck, none of that results in bloats or lost coins, because the miners get to take those over time.
So I think that's an interesting, I think that's a really cool innovation, I guess, with Ergo, is that this concept of storage rent, because I think, how it solves for lost coins, because I don't know if do you know what the estimate is for the amount of Bitcoin that's lost forever currently?
I have no idea. I looked about it.
It's a high number. I think it's like 20 or 30%. But and then if you assume an infinite timeline, into infinity, eventually all Bitcoins are lost. And right. So I think that this concept of storage rent is interesting. So if after 4 years, the Ergo tokens haven't been moved, the miner can reclaim those tokens.
So not all of them, a small fee.
I see. So he just charges a fee on it.
And so the amount, so we're treating this as data. So every UTXO has a certain size. That size is based off of its smart contract that's locked under, or if it's no smart contract, just your public key, get a public key, and then the data that you have in there. And so let's say you take one of Shakespeare's books and put it in a UTXO. The fee to refresh that 4-year period is going to be a lot higher than if it's just an empty, no data attached to a UTXO, and I just sent you $10.
Hmm. And I guess could you get around the storage rent by just moving, the Ergo tokens from, let's say, I had two wallet addresses personally from one wallet. Okay,
Yep.
got it. Yeah, no. Is
But
there any
that's the
other?
thing, right? It's a substitute for a transaction fee, right? Because when you're sending to yourself, you're destroying the old UTXO and creating a new one.
Mhm.
So in essence, you're paying the miner already for that 4 years. And so whether the miner takes the fee for you automatically or you do it yourself, in the end, you're paying the miner. So that's kind of the goal.
And how is Ergo, like, to your knowledge, the only blockchain with a solution towards this sort of innovative solution towards lost coins, or have you seen other blockchains or another blockchain implement a similar type solution?
Specifically for lost coins, I do not believe so. I know there was another blockchain, I forget off the top of my head, but they do kind of an opposite. So instead of paying for data over time, like with storage rent, instead they have a maximum amount of data, and every token they have maps onto whatever 1 kilobyte of data.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a large amount of data in your transaction, you pay more. But I haven't seen any other blockchains. But I do know Ethereum has some improvement proposals where they're talking about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of Ethereum improvement proposals, and most of them don't get implemented. And so it's something that has been talked about for a while because it's not intuitively a very complicated concept, right? But just the implementation has never been done before, and we've already had it running for a year and a half. So in 2.5 years, we'll have the first storage rents trigger.
Being charged, and Ergo has a fixed supply, right? And so,
yes.
How much of the current Ergo supply has been mined?
So off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure right now, but effectively the release schedule is 8 years long for the full emission, which is quite aggressive. And so how the emission works is that the first 2 years, you have a full 75 ergs being released. And then past that, every 3 months, you have a decrease of, I believe, 2.5 ergs per quarter. And so in that way, you keep decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. And the idea here is that the emission schedule is really aggressive because we have storage rent. And so we don't have to have this very long tail emission, because once you already have all the coins out there, people using them, well, then they're going to be, in the States, storage rent can be charged on them. And so you have this cyclical economy where lost coins get back into the economy. People who have broken dApps, those coins get back into the economy. And so the idea is you have this, cyclical feature to the blockchain.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, that's. I think I thought that was when I was reading up on Ergo. I thought that was just a really innovative aspect to it. Is there any other blockchain using Newpopus? Or who created? Like, when did the concept of Newpopus come up?
So Newpopus, I think, is 4 years old. The paper itself. Don't quote me on that, but in that time range.
Yeah.
And there initially was an implementation as a smart contract in Ethereum for evaluating Newpopus, but I think only until the past 2 years have blockchains actually started adding Newpopus supports. And what that means is that the way blocks link to each other, they need specific header data. And I won't get into pedantics, but you have to do a hard fork for most blockchains if you want to support Newpopus for your blockchain. And it's only from that moment that you have Newpopus. And so Ergo was really nice is that because it was a new blockchain, and from day one, from block one, they implemented Newpopus support. And so now we can actually do Newpopus about the entire states, the entire history. So not like in Ethereum where you still have, the first however many years, it's been 6 years, where you can't do Newpopus. With Ergo, from day one, we have Newpopus, which is a lot better.
Can you expand a little?
I think, I was just going to mention, I think Litecoin and Zcash are looking into Newpopus or are starting to implement them, if I recall off the top of my head.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on sort of the consensus? I forgot the name already. It was actually hard to pronounce, but
Auto Lycos.
Yeah, exactly.
Russians and choosing
Oh,
an
it's Russian.
answer.
I couldn't decide if it was ancient Greek or anyway, so it's Russian. Anyway, can you expand a little bit about what makes the consensus mechanism at Ergo unique?
Right. So what's kind of interesting is that there was a experiment that's never been done before on any blockchain, where mining typically requires you to, find a specific number based off of whatever the algorithm at hand requires you to do. And so we have the issue of pools tend to be kind of centralized, right? And so with Ergo, with Autolycos, they came up with the idea of having non-outsourceable proof of work. What that means is that you can't give uh, a shard of your work to someone else, or a share of your work, which is typically done in mining pools. And so this would allow us to kind of level the playing field, right? You don't have these big centralized mining pools that control a blockchain where there's 3 or 4 or 5 of them.
Hmm. When you say, going back to your comment on sharing work, like what occurs in a mining pool, it's like when everyone can you elaborate what you mean by,
Yep.
just for the audience, what do you mean by sharing work?
Right. So typically when you're doing proof of work mining,
Mm.
you have a mining pool, and depending on how exactly, there's some variance in how this is done, but on a high level, um, every single person part of the pool is given a share, a part of the numbers. Like, let's say we're searching between 1 and 1,000.
Hmm.
I give you, Paul, 1 to 10. I take 10 to 20. Give someone else, 20 to 30, and so on forth. And that would be considered a share. And maybe the answer is in number 55. And so that person who finds number 55 would then share the answer, and then that gets accepted by the pool. And that's at a very high level how mining pools work.
Yeah. Yep.
So we all search for these small segments within the state space, and then that's how you find the answer. We tend to have more centralization, right? Because which transactions are accepted, right? Because you're a miner, all you're doing is looking at your share. You don't get to choose which transactions were chosen.
Yep.
And so you kind of have some issues there at play where the mining pools get to control a lot. And so what the core devs behind Ergo came up with is the idea that you can add your private key to the mining process, into the mining algorithm, which is what Autolycos has, which means you can't outsource it, right? Because if you try to do shares with someone else, they have your private key, and so then they can just take all your money. Mm-hmm. And so this was quite novel and interesting. However, at the same time, after a year and a half of being on Mainnet with Autolycos, and it's also memory hard, meaning that it requires a lot of GPU RAM or GRAM, and so that means it's not as prone to ASICs. And so one of the goals also of Autolycos is to be 4 GPUs, so normal people can also mine Ergo. Mm-hmm. And so
when you say normal people, could I just, would it be easy for me right after this chat to start mining Eric?
I mean, if you have a GPU, you can. I mean, normal people, I'm not saying your mother is going to use her old computer to start mining. Yeah. But I'm saying, it's not a multi-million-dollar corporation that has ASICs and, 4 scientists working to figure out how to optimize the algorithm. But, actual people can go to your Walmart, buy a GPU, and get some room, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the initial idea with Autolycos. However, this experiment has come up to a reality that non-outsourceable proof-of-work mining schemes are impossible to prevent mining pools if you have smart contracts. And so that's slightly complicated, but the idea is that with a significantly powerful enough smart contract language, you can always imitate a mining pool with smart contracts and get effectively the same result and bypass the non-outsourceability. And so then the problem there is, when the core devs were thinking of this, you never think like 4 years ahead what this gigantic piece of the puzzle works with this piece. And so this was just discovered by the community who looked into smart contracts and figured this out. And so the realization is that there's kind of no point to have this, and it's unfortunate because it was really cool design and coming up with Autolycos. However, that's why there's an upcoming hard fork, and they're removing this part of Autolycos, of the non-outsource ability, but they're instead focusing more on the memory hardness, so preventing ASICs from being possible, and even coming up with the idea of having an automatic and progressive memory increase requirement. So over time, it's assumed you have to keep acquiring GPUs with more and more RAM, which is happening typically, and that prevents ASICs because ASICs typically don't do well with memory heavy or memory hard proof of work schemes.
And so you guys have been on Mainnet for a year and a half.
Yes.
How's it going? How's it gone so far? Like where's Ergo today in terms of how things were conceived in theory and how they're being implemented in practice?
Right. So what I just mentioned was probably the biggest lesson. It wasn't a failure in any regard. It didn't cause any problems. The blockchain didn't explode. But it's just too bad that we can't try to level the playing field more. And it just seems to be a matter of fact that pools in mining are just kind of natural. And that seems to be the case. But besides that, pretty much every other experiment that Ergo has been going with from Mainnet has been doing very well. And so Ergo, like I mentioned, has a smart contract language. And it's actually the very first blockchain to have the eUTXO model, the extended UTXO model, which adds both data and a powerful smart contract language on top of the Bitcoin model of UTXO. And that allows us to do a lot more powerful stuff, like full-fledged smart contracts. Plus, we have native assets. And so unlike in Ethereum or ERC20, which is just, a smart contract with numbers inside, I or you, Paul, can go and in 30 seconds create tokens, and they're first-class citizens. And so then you can even partially pay in transaction fees with them if the miner thinks your token is worth something. And so a lot of the basics that Ergo has focused on have all worked really well, from native assets to the eUTXO model and smart contracts to having more advanced cryptography with Sigma protocols and a lot of other higher level things on top of that too. But I don't want to, veer off the path.
Yeah. Okay. And so what kind of things are being built on Ergo today?
Right. So it's been quite interesting with the development process because we're the first blockchain to have smart contracts on UTXO. That means the design patterns are completely new. No one's really tread into this area. And so it's quite, from a technical perspective, if you're a nerd like me, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Because there's so much, which is possible in Ethereum, but it's done completely differently in the eUTXO model. And then there's different pluses and different minuses. And so, before I get too much on the side, into the nitty gritty, in terms of like practical things, we already have a bunch of dApps, including an auction house. So your native assets that you had, you can use them potentially for transaction fees. You can sell them to people. We already have image-based NFTs. So, lots of people like to make art, sell them. And so we have image NFTs, which are sellable via the auction house, and that's all decentralized. We have a crowdfunding dApp that's currently more at a developer level, but we're building UI for that soon. There's some code for a DEX that's up and coming in terms of dApps we currently have. We also have a mixer, which allows you to do mixing for both your tokens and Erg. We have quite a few things up and coming, especially, which I'm sure we'll get to a little bit later with the Ergo Summit. We're going to announce a couple things. But also, we have what you would call a treasury system. It's called the
Mhm.
zero knowledge treasury. So it's effectively a mini DAO which controls some amount of funds. And thanks to the interesting cryptography of Ergo called Sigma protocols, which is kind of similar to Schnorr signatures that you may have heard from Bitcoin. And with the zero knowledge treasury, this allows you to have a treasury on chain and have the individual members of the treasury be able to vote, but no one can tell who voted. And so you actually have privacy in voting, even though it's on chain and in public.
Mm. And
And
what
so we have a
about
bunch
like
of dApps like this. So good.
sorry, no, I didn't. Well, I mean, I guess my question is like, what about sort of developer tools and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a big focus has been on getting the basic design patterns for dApps and smart contracts to figure those out and then
Mm.
applying them into real world use cases. And so we have these primitives. And another thing I didn't mention in terms of a use case, we have oracles in the form of oracle pools.
Mhm.
And that's not really user facing, right? It's behind dApps. But
Mhm.
in terms of developer tooling, this is something we've really improved on in the past, I'd say 4 months or so, where previously all tooling was written in Scala, which is the base language of Virgo. And we started to move a lot more towards also supporting Rust, and then from Rust to compile WASM, so JavaScript, and then you can compile to mobile and compile to effectively every platform.
Mhm.
And that has been a nice boon for us because now we're starting to move into having web dApp support, and in the near future we'll likely also have mobile dApps. And we've also built something that we've called the Ergo headless dApp framework and the concept of headless dApps, which are something we think are going to be really interesting for the dApp ecosystem as a whole. And in short, a headless dApp is the idea that you want to separate the front end of your dApp from the smart contract and the off-chain code. And so the current state of affairs for most Ethereum dApps, say, they have a single website. You have to go to that website, and if that website goes down, it's a dApp, a decentralized app, but you can't actually interact with the dApp, right?
Mhm.
No one's going to go and call the different functions by themselves. And so then there's an insight there where what if we create headless dApps, so dApps with no front end, just the dApp itself, all the logic, and we write it in, say, Rust, allow it to be compiled to mobile, web, desktop, and then have front-end developers who don't understand the complexities of smart contracts and everything, be able to build on top of that, and then have a business model where you're paying them 0.25% of every single transaction that gets created using their front end. And so in such a way, you have a decentralizing effect where you can have an economy of different front-end implementers implement on top of your smart contract, the off-chain code, so your core dApp. And then because they're all being paid if their front-end is good, you kind of have this marketplace of competing front ends. And we think this is a really cool approach for the future, where we're not just going to have one person creates everything from start to finish, but we decentralize the front ends and allow people to have competing front ends on mobile, desktop, multiple websites, and they all actually can be monetized naturally without having to do crowdfunding or any other of these options.
Mm. And what about the plan, or I don't know what you would call it, but most of the action today in terms of both developers and users is on like Ethereum. And so what's the strategy there to get those individuals that are building on Ethereum, or users that are playing around with applications on Ethereum, to move to Ergo?
Right. So I think most people like today or in the past week who are using Ethereum aren't very happy about using Ethereum besides
Hmm.
holding Ethereum because the price went up so much. Because when you're paying gas fees of $8, $20 for something, $60, $100 for basic dApps, it's very excessive, right?
Hmm.
And so I think one natural part of that is I think developers want to leave, and actually, I'm in contact with a few projects, and I know people who they want an alternative. They're asking for an alternative because no one wants to keep building on top of Ethereum. And with the ETH2 stuff, there's a lot of stuff going on there too. And it's just not a steady place where everyone's happy. And so that's something that we can capitalize on. And I think it's something that should be a good focus, especially that related to this somewhat too, in regards to, say, mining, because ETH is moving to proof of stake. Ergo benefits in this regard as well, as there's going to be a lot of miners available. And so likely with Ethereum having all these scaling issues and also going to proof of stake, there is a really good opportunity for us in Ergo to take their miners, potentially to get some projects on our side. And having this new model with the EU model, we have a much better direction for long-term scalability of dApps, with the ability to do parallelization of dApps potentially because of the EU TXL model, which isn't possible in the account-based model, or at least no one has come up with any way to do it yet. And so, we're still in very early days, so it's not like Ergo's the best thing, we have everything finished, come and we'll, we're in nirvana. But nonetheless, we have a lot of really good fundamentals, and we're building a lot of awesome stuff. And so I think both for just nascent dApp developers, this is, a burgeoning ecosystem with a lot of new tech that there's a lot of excitement behind. And so in that case, I think it's a really great place to jump into. And if anyone's interested, we at the Ergo Foundation are more than willing to give out grants for any interesting projects. If you're willing to write tutorials, do a small guide, a video guide for how to set something up, we're really excited to, help get the community, helping each other, so to speak. And so what we're really focusing on is looking at the problems of other ecosystems, trying to address those issues so we can bring in developers and the actual dApps themselves that want something better, but also targeting users and dApp developers by trying to provide them with what they want.
And so just quickly on the grants, how big are the grants? What's like the max and median, I guess, that people can expect when they apply for a grant?
So minimum, we could go all the way to $15 if you want to write a simple article or something. But, for most people, that's not really that interesting. So we're probably willing to do hundreds to maybe up to 10,000, depending on the project scale, right?
In US dollar, right? Or in ERG?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's quite volatile these days. I'm not going to change 20% in 15 hours, potentially. And so, if someone comes to us with a really awesome project and it makes sense and, it's big enough in scale, we're more than willing to help fund them. But typically, for most projects, we'd be aiming for something that's smaller, especially since this tech is so new. It's hard to know if someone's really capable and just give them a big chunk of money. If someone's willing to start building on top of Ergo, is part of the ecosystem, and we see you know what you're doing and you're building good stuff, then it's trivial for us to scale that upwards. But with new tech, you don't want to just throw money around and get no results.
No, I totally understand. I totally agree with the sort of view that I think you share, that ultimately, of course, all the users and developers and everyone's on Ethereum, but for a new developer, if a better platform comes along with better tooling and better scalability, I think they'll switch, because they don't really care ultimately about like Vitalik and all that stuff that a lot of people in the crypto community care about. I think people who actually want to build stuff just want to build stuff. They don't, and they want to build it on in the best possible place. So, and you have a benefit of looking at projects have been around for 6 years, 5 years, and seeing the pitfalls that come with it. So I think that's super interesting. Is Ergo, one thing we didn't touch on, is Ergo interoperable at all, or does it have the ability to be interoperable?
Right. So I have two answers to that. Yes and yes. So with Newpopus, we mentioned earlier, we actually, because you have a proof of a Newpopus, a Newpopus is a proof of the blockchain. So what you actually can do is if you have two blockchains that are Newpopus interoperable and they can read Newpopus, you can actually do trustless side chains. And so I can do something on one chain, send you the proof on the other chain, and 100% guaranteed that I did that. The problem with that is Newpopus aren't that popular, and it's quite complex technology, and so we're not really there yet. But maybe in 2, 3, 4 years, once other blockchains start to adapt this, you can actually have purely trustless, 100% proof-based interoperability, which pretty much no other project has available. Because even most interoperability solutions have some sort of company in between, or some sort of federated approach with multiple people with stake on the line. And so in that regard, in the farther future, we have a proof-based approach that looks quite promising. In the shorter term, we're already partnering with Gravity Protocol. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before.
I have. I don't know much about it, but I have heard of them.
Right. So they are a interoperability protocol that doesn't go the proof-based way, which is much more complex and not as easy to integrate with multiple blockchains. But instead, it has a federated approach where you have a bunch of actors who all read the state of one blockchain. They have a bunch of game theoretic incentives, some reputation at stake, and effectively, when something happens on one blockchain, say you want to move one token from Ergo to, say, Solana, because both of these projects are part of Gravity currently, for example, you can burn your token or lock up your token in one blockchain, and then you mint a token that's a wrapped version of that token. And so we are currently in the process where we have the smart contracts already written for Gravity implementation. And so we're going through with looking at the software side and getting full integration. But it looks like most likely by mid-year to end of year, 100% end of year, depending on when Gravity fully launches, that's more on their end than our end. We'll have interoperability with, I believe, Binance Chain, Solana. I think maybe Litecoin was part of that. There's, I think, about 10 to 15 reasonably sized blockchains who are part of the Gravity protocol.
Oh, that's interesting.
Supporting it. And so we're ready. And with a lot of the great native asset features of Ergo, there's actually also a lot of benefits of having this interoperability of tokens between all these ecosystems, where we have first-class citizens, and so we can even have entire wallets where you're only paying, say, in a stable coin or some other coin. And that's something that's not really possible outside of the UTXO model. And so the tech of Ergo is quite exciting because there's like so many of these small caveats that are not possible in the account-based model. And they might seem very benign at first, but then you realize, oh, this works with this, and this works with this. And so we're really at the point where we're trying to find these nooks and crannies and then figure out the design patterns from them so that we have real designs and, how would you say this? Real effects of the blockchain itself that are not replicable in other blockchains. And so even with interoperability, then there might be benefits for other projects or dApps. Even if they live in Solana, there might be some benefits for them to bring their tokens over to Ergo, do some first-class tokenomics, and then maybe go back. And so, we're not trying to be the best and do everything and destroy all other blockchains. We know there's pluses and minuses to all these different approaches, and that's why we also focus on interoperability.
I see. Okay. And quickly before we get into the Ergo Summit, but I was curious how Ergo got started because, and I don't know if you know much about it since you're relatively new to the project, but it's my understanding that one of the co-founders came from IOHK, and so I was just curious as to why they decided to create their own blockchain, focus on finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So Alex Chapernoy and Dmitry Meshkov are the two original core developers who created Virgo. And now we have a lot more core developers, of course. But they were the original ones who were both IOG or IOHK employees. And they were some of the initial employees of IOHK actually, and they wrote a number of papers and did research about the EUTXO model. And they were actually, for example, they very first to prove that, this is pedantic, but I'll still say it nonetheless. You can have non-Turing complete smart contracts, which means you can't do everything possible, like in Ethereum, per transaction in the UTXO model, but you can have Turing complete protocols across multiple transactions. And so to break that down into human speak, what that means is we have much more simple smart contracts that can be analyzed because we don't have this infinite possibility. And so that's why it makes it more prone to formal verification. It's easier to understand where bugs can be found because you're specifying things much more simply. But we still have a lot of power across multiple transactions that allow us to do anything that Ethereum does. And so this is something that both Alex and Dimitri were the first to write this research on this topic. And they wrote this with IOHK. And they wrote a few other papers. And this was in tandem with the early developments of Cardano and with the release of Newpopus, which I mentioned before is a proof of work specific protocol. Both Alex and Dimitri really believed that this was the right approach. And so though they were on great terms with Charles, great terms with Cardano, they saw that Cardano was going proof of stake, and they still believed this research needs to be implemented. And at the time, no one implemented that research. And no one was intending to implement storage rent and a few of these other features like Sigma protocols. And so they decided to go on their own way on good terms. You know, they didn't split because they're angry or anything. They weren't saying proof of work is better, screw proof of stake or anything. But instead, they were happy that they got to do really good research. They went their own way, created Ergo. And then since then, it's been, I think that was 2017, and the mainnet launch was July 2019.
And so why the focus on, you know, other blockchains or like, oh, we're a smart contract where you can do things? Why? And I guess from my reading Ergo, you know, they have a focus on finance, and that's just as, you know, finance appears to be the first lawful sort of case for blockchain technology. At least that's what it's appeared to be. But I'm just curious if there's anything else, because it's just you know, the messaging is all around for financial primitives and financial applications. So.
Yeah, so sorry, I broke up a little bit. Did you say what else is possible? Is that your question?
No. Like, why the focus on finance? Like, what, you know, why did they decide for the messaging to be on finance?
Yeah, so I think this goes to the fact that almost all of the core devs of Ergo have been in this blockchain game for a very long time. Most of them from 2010, 2011, 2012. Alex Chaperno was actually one of the core devs of NXT, if anyone remembers that. It originally was the top 3 cryptocurrency back in 2014, I believe. And they've seen a lot of blockchains and a lot of promises. And so when I've talked to them about, you know, why do they choose to design the protocol like this? Why do they make this decision, that decision? Why are they focused on the financial aspect? It's because they really do believe that blockchain technology has a purpose, and it has a purpose where it can actually help everyday people and not just, you know, build multi-billion-dollar DeFi apps where, you know, there's a lot of risk at hand. You don't know even who created the DeFi app. You know, it's just anonymous, and then oops, you know, there's a hack, and then, you know, the kind of chaos of Ethereum that, you know, keeps running in circles because there's a lot of money to be had. They don't really believe that's the right approach. They instead believe that we need to build these financial primitives, as you mentioned, that can actually help people who, say, don't have access to banks, or say, for example, one piece of research that was Alex did before working on Ergo was for local exchange trading systems. They're called LETs. And this is something that's been used all across the world when currencies have fallen. So it's effectively small communities coming together and creating their own ledger and having that ledger act as kind of faux credit with an upper and lower limits of how much people can borrow from each other. And so, for example, one of the first things that Alex and I believe Dimitri also wrote the smart contracts for this was how can you embed a LETS a local exchange trading system trustlessly on top of Ergo. So let's say you're in a part of the world that you want to just have a small community and you want to have your own ledger, and maybe you're in a smaller town but you still have internet access. This is something that you can use Ergo for, and that's kind of the angle that we've been focused on, is both the small cases where you're actually helping real people and not just big finance, but also what are the financial primitives that can be used for really complex DeFi protocols, stablecoins, which is something we're going to be talking about at the Ergo Summit. That will be quite interesting. And it's kind of an idea of getting back to basics of what's actually useful and not just what makes a profit, because people get hyped and excited.
Okay. And I guess, the last couple of minutes before we move to the Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please just dump it into the chat. But so if you could elaborate a little bit more on the upcoming Ergo Summit. It's on the 21st or 23rd. Which day is it?
On the 23rd. Yeah.
On the 23rd. What can people expect? How can people attend?
On the 23rd.
The 23rd, right? So it might be lagging a bit.
Yep.
Yeah. So how can people participate, attend? What can people expect at the summit?
So everyone can go to ergosummit.org, and you'll see both the lineup of speakers and the date and time. The event will be held on YouTube as a premiered event, and so everyone will be there live. All of the speakers that will be presenting during the event will be also in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, Q&A, they can feel free to talk in the YouTube chat, and they'll have all their questions answered. And to kind of give it a short pitch, the Ergo Summit is kind of the first big event since the launch of Mainnet 1.5 years ago. And so we're focusing both on all of the accomplishments that we've managed to make, what we've built up, what are the latest tools, tech, dApps, and so on forth. And we're actually going to be announcing and doing a lot of talks on a brand new stablecoin called AgeUSD. And so if people are interested, this is the very first UTXO-based stablecoin that I believe has ever been made. And so if you're interested, we're going to be releasing specs, smart contracts, explaining how it all works. And so if you're technical, we're going to be doing a lot there. So that should be quite exciting. We're going to be talking about Oracle pools, a bunch of different developer tooling that we have in the ecosystem, and also talking about what's coming up in the near future for Ergo and the ecosystem as a whole, both in terms of wallets, dApp support, and so on.
Okay, sorry, I think my video cut out there, but and so can people contribute? Can people, how can people help with the Ergo Summit?
So with the Ergo Summit specifically, if anyone's excited about Ergo, it'd be really great if you could, share the link, ergosummit.org. On the website, there's a Telegram channel. Feel free to come join Telegram, talk with us. If you're really excited about Ergo and you're really great at writing, we'd probably be willing to give you a grant to write about the Ergo Summit or other parts of Ergo. And so just in general, if you're really interested, feel free to come join Telegram, talk with us. We're really open, friendly. And if you're a developer, we'd be really happy to also have you as well.
Great. So there's a couple questions in here. I think the first one, I know the answer, but is there ever a plan to move to proof of stake?
Right. So the answer to that is no. So like we mentioned with Newpopus, that's something that is actually impossible to do in proof of stake. And there are other benefits of proof of work which aren't as popularly talked about. And it's not to say that proof of work is 100% better and that proof of stake sucks. They're just different systems, right? And they have different benefits, different pros, different cons. And so with proof of stake, one thing that's also very untested is what the security model of proof of stake blockchains is when you have smart contracts, right? Because when you have smart contracts that centralize where the stake is delegated to, that's kind of an inherent issue because the bigger a DeFi dApp is, the more stake it has available at its disposal if you're doing like collateralized DeFi. And so that's something that requires a lot of research, and some research is being done to that, but it's not really figured out yet. And that's inherently a weak point. And one of the points of Ergo is to try to stick to proof of work because it's solid, it works, it gives us awesome things like Newpopus, and then focus more on the complex implementation of dApps on top of the EUTXO model, so we can find novel things there rather than trying to be the 255th proof of stake cryptocurrency that's going to try and be the third generation that solves it all. Furthermore, we're working with Cardano, and so we have a great relationship, and we're looking at interoperability between Ergo and Cardano, and having Newpopus and other proof of work benefits in Ergo and proof of stake benefits in Cardano provides a great synergy.
Mm-hmm. And so the next question fits perfectly in that vein, but can you elaborate further on the relationship between Emurgo and Ergo?
Right. Emurgo has partnered with the Ergo Foundation, and this gets slightly complicated because I am head of research at Emurgo, and I am a Ergo Foundation board member. And so, though these two organizations are separate, I myself am part of both organizations. And so, when I'm speaking, that does complicate things a little bit. But effectively, with this partnership, Emurgo is doing a lot of, I would say, major research we've done. We've released Oracle pools, done a bunch of research into how can you do trustless proofs and do things like trustless insurance on top of EUTXO blockchains. We have focused a lot of research also on the stablecoin and how you can do that in a UTXO model. This has all been part of the partnership between Ergo Foundation and Emurgo. Furthermore, Emurgo has also added ERG support to Yoroi, and in the coming future, we're going to have native asset support. So all native assets on Ergo will be usable in Yoroi, and full-fledged web dApp support, similar to MetaMask, like most people are used to. And so effectively, Emurgo is providing a lot of research and practical tools and developer tooling to the ecosystem as a part of the partnership, and also looking at how to utilize the best of both Ergo and the best of Cardano. So as we move forward into Goguen and Cardano and have a lot of these more complex features and smart contracts, we can start to see, okay, in a year, in 2, in 3, and 4, how do we take the best of both worlds and make them interop and do really well together?
Great. Well, I guess the last question I had is, and I always end these events like this, but how can we be helpful to you, to Ergo, to Emurgo, just as a community moving forward?
Right. Yeah, so I think what would be best is just if you can try out the tech yourself. I'm not going to tell you to pitch for us if you don't know what you're pitching, or if you've never tried out the tech, well, then you don't actually care about it, right? So I would implore everyone watching to, go, if you can acquire some ERG, or you just join the community. We have a very generous community on Telegram. We're more than willing to tip you an ERG 2, 3, 4, 5. And so if you want to get started, jump into the ERG ecosystem, try out some dApps. I'd recommend downloading Yoroi, the Emurgo wallet, which has high quality, first class ERG support. And then, either getting some ERGs or taking part in the community, trying to see if you can acquire some ERGs, and then playing around with some dApps. Maybe if you're an artist, you create a art NFT, sell it on the auction house, maybe earn a little income. If you're curious about what's available in the ecosystem, we have sigmaverse.io, which is kind of a search engine for dApps in the ecosystem. And so if anyone's interested in helping us out, just feel free to come join the community, try things out. And then if you like it, try to share with others, maybe take part in the community more, maybe develop something. Really in the growing and expanding phase. And so right now what we need is more people trying stuff out, and if they like it, sharing it with others.
Great. We'll keep. You know, as you know, not as a user of Erg, but I do have some Erg tokens. I was very excited when Uroi came out because my Erg was just sitting on Hotbit, and I have no idea what Hotbit does. So
Yeah.
that was a very welcome addition to the Ergo community and tooling. So anyway, but Rob, it's been a real pleasure speaking today. Thanks for coming on. Great to catch up as always, and really looking forward to the Ergo Summit. And we'll looking forward to the future and what Ergo holds. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me on.